I feel bad for everyone. It's becoming late, and
You're on. You're live. You're
so
live.
awesome. So whatever we just spoke about was basically, so one reason why the Muslims decided that the Temple Mount is where they want to put Al-Aqsa Mosque there is because of political reasons, right? To have something that's so to speak, to anoint a holy site that's going to be close to where their power is in Syria, and because they can't, have they have issues with ruling all the way to Mecca, which is much farther south in Saudi today. So that was one reason. Another reason is actually what we were saying before, that religions want to be different, but they also want to try to be, in a way, have some similarities. So just like Christianity did with what we said before with the sepulchre, where Jesus was crucified in a temple that was a pagan temple, and they converted it to a church. Muslims did similar. They wanted to show that if they're now going to be the third monotheistic religion in the world, and they believe in one God, and the two existing religions, which by the way they believe in as well, because in Islam it doesn't contradict. It's just that Muhammad's word is the final say. They have to have a piece of the holy city in order to put themselves on the world stage and on history's stage as a world's main religion. So that's another reason why they put it up, why they decided to allocate Jerusalem, that is not even mentioned there, as such a holy site in the Islam. Two fun facts. One is that when they built the Dome of the Rock, okay, at the time there was already the sepulchre, right? The church that was built on the Cardo, right, till today, where Jesus is crucified, has a dome, right? In those days, it also had a dome. It actually had a golden dome because it was for the goddess of Aphrodite. And so when Muslims started building it in the beginning of the 8th century, they decided that size matters, and they looked at their dome and they wanted a bigger dome. And that's where the Al-Aqsa Mosque, in a way, has the dome that it has, which is bigger than the church, the sepulchre. And then later on, in the year 1700, when Rabbi Yehuda Chassid makes Aliyah with his 300 famous Talmidim, and they build the synagogue there that later on was known as the Churva because it was destroyed. And just last 10 years ago, 15 years, it was rebuilt. Today, the beautiful synagogue in the old city in Jerusalem, the Churva, but it had a diameter that was specifically made to be just a little bit wider than the Al-Aqsa Mosque's dome. So
it's much smaller, though. Much
you see
smaller,
that
no?
sometimes, right. So it's smaller from a height point of view because it's not that noticeable as, first of all, don't forget that the Al-Aqsa Mosque stands next to, so it has a big, you could see it from everywhere.
It's also gold.
There's nothing around it, right? In the Jewish center, in the Jewish quarter, there are also things all around it. But we're not talking now about the size. We're talking about the diameter, meaning it's wider, and it's specifically made wider, not by much, in order to outdo the Al-Aqsa Mosque. So you see that sometimes competition between religions.
Hello. Are we talking about the Al-Aqsa Mosque or the Dome of the Rock? Because the Dome of the Rock has a bigger dome than Al-Aqsa, and it's gold. Whereas
Al-Aqsa Mosque, the Al-Aqsa Mosque,
and that one has a smaller dome than the Dome of the Rock, but it was never gold, was it?
I actually only knew that there was one dome. As someone that grew up in Jerusalem, that's
No,
really
no, no.
bad
There were
about 'em.
2 domes. No, I'm talking about the diameter, meaning not it. It's made much lower in height, obviously, and they're the Dome
Where's
of the
there another
Rock
dome?
and the Al-Aqsa Mosque.
Say
There are
about
2 domes.
100 feet away from each other, 2 different buildings on the Temple Mount. The one that's
Yeah,
right above the
you would
Kotel,
recognize it.
the one that's
I've
right
actually
above
been to
the,
Har Bayit, so I should remember. I don't remember a second one.
the one
I'll
that's
look at
right above
pictures.
the Kotel is Al-Aqsa, and the other. I'm sorry, Hillel. Why am I doing this? This is your shir. Go ahead.
Sorry, I'm gonna look it up. Sorry.
No, it's fine. It's yeah. Pina,
There's
do us a
audience
favor and look it up. No, I'm
participation.
kidding.
Audience participation.
No,
Welcome.
of course. Pina, go. When you always go down, you know this. When you go down in the stairs, the Golden Dome, you obviously know because it always gets all the attention. But you always, when you go down the stairs, when you could already see the Kotel, if you look to your right, you'll see the dome there. Once you see it, you'll recognize it. It's just people prefer gold, but
I only see the gold
actually
dome.
for Muslims, that's for Muslim, or you prefer diamonds, but whatever. But for Muslims, Al-Aqsa Mosque is really the holy part. Later on, they just took the Dome of the Rock because they knew that that was also pretty much the place that was holy to the Jewish people, because of the Even Ashtia underneath there. So just to Jake's question, I think they took the diameter and they made it a bit wider, just a bit longer, of the Al-Aqsa Mosque. It could be of the Dome of the Rock. I'll check that because it's a great question. I need to actually check my notes. I did a fascinating, when I did my master's in Jerusalem, one of the courses was the competition for holiness in Jerusalem, and we actually got to go also literally to all these places, so it was quite fascinating. So anyway, whatever, that was one thing that Jews try. In the end, we tried out doing, I guess, the other 2 religions with the Chorva. And then just one more thing is that with the ongoing story of the problematic narrative of Islam, and obviously disclosure, I'm not Muslim, so I'm biased, is that Jerusalem, the story of Muhammad and Al-Buraq kept on changing places. So in the beginning, El-Buraq was completely irrelevant. It was where Muhammad ascended, which was in the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and that was in the southern part of the wall. Then later on, with time, they decided that El-Buraq was tied there. Then in the riots, I'm now fast forwarding a lot, when it started becoming more of a conflict, in 1929, in the famous riots in Israel, the Hebron riots, that started because some Jews wanted to put some chairs, tables there. It was Yom Kippur. Some say they wanted to put a mechitza. It doesn't contradict. Whatever it is, and they said that they're taking over the Haram el-Shif, what they call, that they're taking over the Temple Mount, the Jews, and that's when the riot started. By the way, I remember Rav Kook saying how his uncle, Rav Kook, the chief rabbi of Rehovot, said how his uncle, his head was put in an oven in Hebron. Those are very bad riots, specifically in Hebron. I think there were, like, I might be wrong, but maybe 65 Jews that were massacred in those riots.
I heard it was more. I heard it was 100.
I think a relative of Eli's died there.
Right. So I'm saying in Hebron it was, because there were Jews that died also in other places. But it could be that we're, about 100 that were in Hebron alone. I do definitely know that, I don't know why the number 65 resonates with me, but it could be 100. They were definitely more than 100, unfortunately, all around, because Hebron was not the only place that there were riots. Sorry, what are you asking?
No, I said you're the historian. You probably know better than I do.
No, I don't remember numbers like that. We all read what we read. It's not. We're all historians, whether we like it or not.
We're not.
So 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 just, and then a fun fact, in 1999, when, and this is when the narrative started changing. The narrative started changing already in 1929, but it was dismissed. Suddenly they were saying, no, the Kotel is also holy for us, or you can't be here because that's part of the Temple Mount. And in 1999, Arafat, where Barak was willing to in a way give the Temple Mount to the Palestinians and keep the Kotel to the Jewish people, then suddenly Arafat, who, again, this is not with going into politics, but who was the leader, who was in a way, from their point of view, not able to do the leap forward. He came up with an excuse, and again, maybe he was never wanting to do peace. I'm not getting into now the peace question. I'm just saying what he came up with, and this is how history is used many times, and religions are used for political purposes. He said, we have to have the Wailing Wall. We have to have the Kotel, because the Kotel is where El Burak, where Muhammad tied his donkey. He tied his donkey to one of the stones of the Kotel. So, and that was the, if you want, the official religious excuse of why there was not a peace agreement. Now, obviously, there was because of probably a million other reasons, and it was, but the official excuse of the Palestinians is that they changed the narrative of the story of Jerusalem, just like Muslims did in the 7th and 8th century to be on the map. They did it again, just with relocating where his donkey, not that I know why that matters that much, where his donkey was tied, where clearly, according to Islamic sources,
flying donkey. It makes
his
sense.
donkey was tied, and where his donkey was tied to the south wall, which is completely not the Kotel. So anyway, that's just like, if you want a fun fact of how you see history changing and how myths are created in order to, and being obviously anachronistic, in order to suit political agendas of people that, lived way after this happened. So, I'm not gonna prolong this much more. I'll just say that later on, so as Islam got established, the Jerusalem got more and more important, but it wasn't as important as you think it was. It went to a few houses, the house of the house of Umayyah, then it was the house of Abbas, then it was the house of Fatima. But interestingly enough, and again, nice advocacy for Israel, during all that time, it was never made the capital of any one of those dynasties, ever. The dynasty, it was either Damascus, then it was Iraq, today, Persia, that was their headquarters in Iraq. Come on, in Baghdad. Sorry, and then after Baghdad, it was Fatima was in Cairo. So nothing to do with Jerusalem. Fast forwarding again later in Jordan, when Jordan was in control of the of Jerusalem between 1949 to 1967, they also didn't make it their capital. So meaning the narrative of the Arabs is always, we want it as our capital. But interestingly enough, there wasn't any time in history where it was controlled by Muslims and was made a capital. The same thing goes obviously with the when the Turks were the Turkish Empire, the Ottomans, they also obviously never made Jerusalem a capital. So that's another very difficult, that's another challenge on their narrative for what, the history of Jerusalem, where now they were like to die for it. So leaving all that aside, going back just to after Islam, then we know that they were, after those houses, the Muslim houses, Israel was, by the way, destroyed quite a few times. I mean, when I say destroyed, I mean the walls, like the southern wall known today. Till today, you see even some of those stones in the archaeological findings. There were a lot of earthquakes throughout history in Jerusalem. A famous one was in the year 1033, if I'm not mistaken. There was another one in the 12th century. They were quite a lot of them that really decimated big parts of Jerusalem. And so it was always a ever-changing thing. The walls, the vicinity of Jerusalem. Comes the year 1099, the Crusades, they conquer the Jerusalem, and they make the kingdom of Jerusalem. King Ivigan, I think off the top of my head, the first was the king of Jerusalem. So interestingly enough, his corridors, meaning where he slept, was where Al-Aqsa Mosque is today, and the and where there used to be the temple, right, the Jewish temple, or where there was the Dome of the Rock. That's where that whole area was given to the Templars, to the Knights of the Templars, which obviously all the stories, even from a lot of conspiracy stories as well. Templars obviously come from the word temple. They were like guarding the temple. They had an interesting alliance with Jews, even though they were Christian knights who came in crusades, who obviously persecuted the Jews. But at that time, during the time of 88-year span, Jerusalem was mainly run by Christians. Jews were not allowed to be in Jerusalem. Muslims as well. And in fact, a lot of the Muslims were completely completely massacred when the Crusades came there. Interestingly enough, the Crusades came in again for 20 years. Comes the 13th century, between the Crusades, the Mamelukes, the Muslims, and all the earthquakes, Jerusalem was completely in ruins, to the extent, and there were barely any Jews there, to the extent that when Ramban makes Aliyah to Israel, he records in his notes, in his diary, he records that he comes to Jerusalem, and listen to what he says. He says there are like 2,000 Muslims, there are whatever Christians here and there, and there's not even 100 Jews. They're like only a couple. And he said one does this and one does that. There was literally no Jews in Jerusalem. And then the Mamelukes come. Basically, those centuries, really, Jerusalem is becoming already a much more dignified place from an Islamic point of view. And then the Ottoman Empire conquers Jerusalem around the year 1517 by Suleiman the Great. And this is pretty much, that brings us up to World War I, where eventually the British Mandate starts after it. Interesting, just a fun fact, Suleiman the Great redoes the Tower of David, which we all know today from the famous, from photos of Yerushalayim, like with Jaffa Gate. He builds all the external walls. He actually makes Jerusalem just a bit larger. Does anyone know Har Zion, the Zion Mount, which is like the highest part in the old city? Is anyone familiar with that? It's like when you...
Anna, are you familiar with that?
Har Zion? Is that where they take you and show you like to overlooking the highest point?
It's not near the cemetery.
So it's very cool. You should actually, okay, so this is Yafo Gate, okay? You had a fun time in Mamilla. You're going up in the stairs, and you can make a left to Jaffa Gate, right? Mm-hmm. Right, to go into the city. If you make a right, you'll see all the walls, and you could go and take that route, and you go up the hill. That's Mount Zion. Now, there are a lot of reasons why it's called Mount Zion. It's actually technically Mount Zion. You would imagine needs to be where the temple is at. It's a whole historic debate, and it's actually fascinating. It's not for now, but on Mount Zion, there are a few things. There's, for instance, a German church there. That's where in 1967 the one of the chativot of the Tzanchanim went through the Shar Zion, which is on the top there. That's how they actually went into the old city. And there were two things there that's interesting to remember, because whatever was in the wall was post 1948 or from 1949, that was Jordanian. Whatever was out of the wall at that specific corner was Israel, and it was high up. There was a window in the in something called the President's Room. Why was it called the President's Room? It was where the President of Israel used to sit, and there was a little window there, and that was the only window that you could really look and see the Kotel from. And so the president used to be there. My father actually remembers one as a kid, pre-1967, they went there once to the president's room, and it was like a whole line, and it was obviously many times it wasn't that safe because Jordanian snipers used to shoot that entire area of Yamin Moshe today, Mamilla, was completely desolate. But on the corner there, because you could go down from Yamin Moshe, there was a little nook in which you could see the Kotel. And it was like the closest that you could see the Kotel that was reachable. And that was right on because it's the top of the mountain. Now, remember I told you.
I know what you're talking about.
You could see it.
Is there a kever over there?
By the way,
Kohen?
there they say, yes, so there's Kerer David HaMelech, but it's very very ambiguous if it's Kever David HaMelech. It's probably more like night from the 13th century. It's very highly doubtful that it is David HaMelech. Later on, Christianity wanted to do something there, so they said, okay, this is where the Last Supper was. As you could already see, a lot of people through history try to take certain sites and, glue to them certain historical or religious stories. But the interesting thing is, because it was outside of the city walls that Suleiman built, it's outside. That's why the president's room is out there and it's higher. So now answer this riddle. Why a fortress? Suleiman built Jerusalem as a fortress. That's why he did the big walls. It was not for beauty. There was nothing around Jerusalem. It was made as a military fortress, so no one could come and just breach the walls. So why the highest part of Har Zion is not included in the wall? It doesn't include that part. Does anyone know?
Wasn't the architect killed for doing it wrong?
That's exactly it. There's no reason whatsoever why it was a mistake of the architect, and that's why they were executed in the end.
Literally?
Sorry? Yeah, he executed
How do you make
all
such a
the
mistake?
architects. That's why he executed them.
Man.
It was
Sorry
kind
to
of
hear
a
that.
dumb mistake, but that actually, already, even in the 6-day war, that gave us strategic. Sorry?
I didn't know it was Suleiman, but I've heard that before since I was a kid.
Yeah, it was Suleiman, and that's, by the way, there was one thing that actually helped Israel in the 6-day war, because it gave a bit of an advantage there for when they came from the mountain. Obviously, they also came from around. So that's just another fun thing. Let's just end, because it could go on and on. How many minutes do we have, Tamar?
We have like 10 minutes.
10? That much?
And
Don't
then
worry,
we have another Zoom with 40 more minutes. So as long as you want.
No,
We're here. I think
So
Adam might be going to
painful.
sleep soon. No one else is
I don't know if
actually
it's painful for you, it's painful for me.
I am going to sleep soon.
Yep.
Hannah looks a little tired too.
But this is actually a good thing to go to sleep to. You have Torah as you fall asleep. Then you have to.
Jill's voice.
Exactly. It's
It
very
basically
soothing.
means.
Yeah, but
Thank you. I'm
you're
blushing.
good. Guys, I did put the next
Um,
I did put the information though in the chat, and I sent it around a little bit in case,
This is gonna be the last one.
just in case.
So no. Oh, this is gonna be the last one now. I'm timing it. So I just want to say something that connects a bit to the end, actually, to how we started in the beginning. None of you were there. You remember the story? You remember, right? I know. You remember the story about Shmuel Bet, with the whole story with David and the Goren Arvana Yevusi, and the place with the sword with the angel pointing to where the temple would be. Anyway, in after 1948, Naomi Shemer wrote the timeless words of the song Yerushalayim Shel Zahav, and she was trying to find a way to convey the yearning and the way the Jewish people are, how broken they feel, that they may have independence, they may have now finally a Jewish state, but Jerusalem is not ours. And she wrote Yerushalayim Shel Zahav Shel Nechoshet V'Shel Or. And interestingly or mistakenly, many people think, oh, that's because Jerusalem has some of these domes and they're golden and it's beautiful and gold. It's actually a bit deeper than that. There's a story in the Talmud in which it records a Rabbi sitting with his young wife, the daughter of Kalba Savua. And as we all know, Kalba Savua disowned Rabbi Akiva, and he didn't want his daughter to marry him. 20 years later, he became a big rabbi, and that's where he regretted everything, Kalba Savua. But let's go back to their young love, and they were extremely poor. They lived in this shack, and it was the winds were roaring outside, and it was a cold winter day. And Rabbi Akiva looks at his newly married wife and says to her, "If only I could have, I would have bought you a Jerusalem of gold."
Necklace.
And what was that Jerusalem of gold? So actually not exactly a necklace. They found in archaeological excavations around Syria today in Damascus, they found actually something, and there also are records that a Jerusalem of gold used to be something that the wealthy girls in Jerusalem used to wear. It was like a golden crown, a little golden crown. We don't know if it says Jerusalem on it or maybe some other things were carved on it.
I thought it was a necklace
that was called the
Yerushalayim
Jerusalem of
Shel
gold.
Zahav. No?
According to what they found, I remember reading in a few places that it was a crown, but whatever it was, the idea is that Naomi Shemer decided to pick that specific term in order to convey how, just like Rabbi Akiva, who felt so sincere about his young love, and he wanted to give her the whole world, but he couldn't have because he was so poor. And in a way, she tried to conveying how our heart is broken. Like, we want Jerusalem of gold. Like, we're in a way so poor, we can't. We can't really show our love because we're not there. It's not. We're not in control of Jerusalem, and nonetheless, Jerusalem of gold is how we look at you. It's we look at you as the crown on our heads. It's only if we could have, we would have had you, and we would have and that would, like, and that in us being enduring to you, and eventually aspiring to being in control of Jerusalem and having that as part of the Jewish state, means that this is how we're going to show our love with God, or this is how we convey our strong love to Jerusalem. And that's why she decided to take that term Jerusalem of gold to convey that as the perfect wedding gift in the days of the Second Temple, and to convey it through those words of Rabbi Akiva, of how that was a way for him to really express his deepest emotions of love. And eventually we know that, in 1967, literally that night, as they heard that Jerusalem, on the fourth day of the 6-day war, Jerusalem was conquered, and she was actually a soldier down in Sinai, and they heard about it, and she already sat that night. Naomi Shemer sat that night, and they wrote another extra stanza on how we now return to Jerusalem. And that song was so popular, especially after 1967, that there were even many voices who were suggesting to turn that into the national anthem. So on that note, and that's why I connected it to the beginning, what we said of the yearning of the Mashiach, of why, in a way, that angel made King David count the people. It was in a way because of the sin of not yearning Mashiach enough. So it's in a way that song Jerusalem of Gold in our modern times always, reflected the yearning to a Jerusalem of gold, to something better, not just what we have right now, but to something that's more than just what we have, for it to really be a Jerusalem of gold.
Amen.
Thank you, Hillel.
Funny fact, going back to you mentioned Suleiman the Magnificent rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem. So there are the Ottomans. It wasn't until the Ottomans were actually pretty welcoming to the Jews, because this happened, this happened 50 years after the expulsion from Spain, and during the expulsions and his life was during the expulsions from Portugal, Italy, and all the subsequent royal expulsions that happened in Europe. The Ottomans were very welcoming to Jews. There's even documents how they made fun of the European kings, because the Brings were bringing all their textiles and their money to the Ottoman economy. So there's
and also the Jews preferred the Ottomans and the Byzantine Empire, because they also overrided the Byzantine Empire, which persecuted the Jews historically.
Right. So
yeah, you preferred being a friend of the Muslims in the Middle Ages than the Christians, kind of contrary of today.
Right.
Where you may feel more scared, but that's
So
history, the comedy of history. Yeah.
I read in a book, there's a rumor that they were so welcoming to the Jews that Suleiman's father took a prominent, wealthy converso's daughter into his harem, and that woman ended up being
interesting. Yeah.
the mother of Suleiman.
Wait, guys, sorry, go ahead.
Interesting. I didn't know that story. It could be Jewish apologeticness, or it could really be true. But it's interesting, very interesting.
It's a rumor.
Oh, okay, it's a rumor.
Guys, we're doing
so it must be true.
Guys,